the Vineyard Theater in New York City, the Monitor Channel is proud to present Mort Sahl Live. Ladies and gentlemen, Mort Sahl.
Thank you very much. We're happy to see you, and thanks for coming. And I want to say, first of all, before anything else, before we start kidding around, that hopefully that the president is feeling very well, and he's going to be back on the job tomorrow after a night's sleep. They gave him a halcyon, of all things, and but not habitually. So he's okay. And this means that Dan Quayle is no longer a heartbeat from impeachment. Okay. So this is the Wall Street Journal. It's a bugle of what used to be American business, now that General Motors has been recalled. And we go through all the papers. You'll notice we don't use the Christian Science Monitor tonight because we don't want to be accused of nepotism. Now, the president, as you know, when he finishes this trip, will have gone 107,000 miles. He originally, if you saw David Brinkley on Sunday, he originally was supposed to sit there and be grilled about the recession by Sam Donaldson. They're supposed to have a head-to-head for 45 minutes. So this will give you an idea of how far someone will go to avoid spending an hour with Sam Donaldson. Just meanwhile, the president has a new chief of staff now, Sam Skinner, who's covering all the bases. And they got rid of Sununu, which will give you an idea of how ruthless these people are, even though they seem nice. And Sununu, as you know, rubbed everybody the wrong way. Actually, the first time I saw him speak was at the National Press Club in Washington. And Mrs. Bush was sitting with his assistants. And they were all bored because he proselytizes all the time, Sununu. Yeah, I mean, it's possibly worse if you're a friend of his than if you're an enemy. So, which is an illustrious list. You're in good company. So, anyway, a couple of the guys became restive while he went on, and Mrs. Bush chastised them, and she said, "You ought to listen to this man. He's done more for my husband than anyone alive in America." And later, Secretary Baker said, "Mrs. Bush has to say that, or she'll lose her job." So that'll give you an idea of the power of Sununu. Anyway, at the cabinet meeting, Sununu would start them with a prayer. You know, President Bush is a kind of a Sunday prayer guy, but Sununu is extremely religious. So he used to start them with a prayer, and most of the guys hated it, you know. And the guys that were there with cabinet rank, I mean, not the regular cabinet members, people like Dick Darman, you know, at OMB and all, they kind of prayed sort of reluctantly, you know. And Sununu was leading a prayer one day, and as the legend goes, he said to Darman, "I can't hear you." And Darman is reputed to have answered, "I wasn't talking to you." So it's just something to think about. Anyway, so what did they used to say when Sununu was there? They used to say, "Things are so bad that the people on the White House staff are stabbing each other in the front." So anyway, so much for that. I get a call. This is a true story, by the way, and everything I tell you is true, but this is actual. Does that help you? Well, let me tell you about this. So anyway, I get a call, and this lady is with the American Civil Liberties Union, right? And they're busy. They're great. You know, why aren't there more Eskimo anchor men and all that? So she says to me, "We'd like you to perform at this dinner because we're naming Harry Belafonte the Man of the Year." So I said, "Which year?" You know, in case I missed his contribution. So recently. So she says to me, "We'd like you to be there and entertain at this thing," and so forth. So I'm getting the details, and she said, "The board wasn't unanimous about you. A lot of people on the board didn't like you. Edward Asner didn't like you," and she named several people who didn't like me because they said I had gone to the right. I'm not a true liberal. Most of them are actors in Oliver Stone's movie. So I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they say something 28 years ago? We needed the grief to separate us from the objectivity of the case. So more about this later, of course. So now that I know you're interested in that issue. So she says to me, they said some terrible things about you. They said you knew Reagan. I said, I know Reagan. They said, and they said you knew Bush. I said, I know Bush. She said, oh, really? Then, you know, there's some merit to their charges. They said you performed at the White House. I said, I did. And they said, well, they said that you've gone to the right. I said, that might not be so accurate. You know, she said, well, they said you're a Republican and everything. So we talked a while, and I said, let me ask you something. You know, you seem like such a self-sacrificing young lady. You have no life of your own. All you do is run around and get Eskimos jobs as anchormen and everything. How did you get in the ACLU? She said, because I never take the easy path, you know? And she said, my parents live in Skokie, Illinois, this Jewish, quote, suburb, and the Nazis wanted to march there, and the Jewish community wouldn't let them. So I was proud of the ACLU because we stood up and got them a parade permit so the Nazis could walk through this Jewish area. So then she said to me, returning to you for a minute, Mort, are you a Republican? So I said to her, why is it okay to be a Nazi but not a Republican? So anyway, I know what you're all going to say to me. You say, you know, if we met backstage, well, you know, you'd say to me, your stuff is kind of far out and everything. Do you ever think about what you say? I try not to, you know. I don't want to lose my amateur standing as a philosopher. Anyway, this is the Monitor channel, and I want you to know that that means, by definition, nobody's afraid of ideas on this show. So the music is jazz, Amy Duncan and the Brass Tacks, and the language is humor, and the message is hope, and I'll see you in a minute with the news. Thank you. This is the news review, and I like to call this show The Last Word because most of you are sick to death of the news. You get it day and night, and all the networks are doing it overnight and so forth. So we're going to try and present some sides of it that you may not have considered. So let's start off with the candidates. Good, huh?
Every day, the press does the same thing. What about the presidency? What about this? What about that? Do you have a new suit? Did you buy it? Don't you need a haircut? How can you do it? Did you have plastic surgery? What about the presidency? What? I don't want to talk about the president. Come on, don't be coy, don't be cute, don't be ambivalent. Okay, what do you want to know about the president? You running? Well, I don't know. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. Next day. The governor, although he says he's not interested in the presidency, talked to us about it for 15 minutes.
Okay, so meanwhile, so this guy in Chicago decided this is the man, it must be the Democratic candidate. So he's against Cuomo's will, he's drafting him. So this afternoon, in response, Cuomo announced he's going to Canada. Doesn't want to be drafted. Growing a beard, and he's going to wear Earth shoes. And he says he'll come back to America when the country's sane again. Okay, let's proceed.
Today, Bush faces a serious challenge from both the left and the right.
We know it will not be George Bush. We know that the man who brought us voodoo economics has become the witch doctor of American health care.
Saying that we are going to ration health care is absolutely inconceivable.
The whole George Herbert Walker Bush. Can't get it right. Born on third base, thinks he hit a triple.
He thinks you can end the recession by spending $28 at the mall.
I have this number that some of you may not take seriously. Hey, I'm going to bring it up here, and I'm not going to be silent. I'm going to show it to you, because it's the only device I know to break the gridlock and the corrupt stranglehold of money.
This is the graduate of Holy Cross. That's the number that was on his back when he played football. So, you know, Governor Brown was my governor in California, so I feel it's my responsibility to explain him to you. he studied to be a priest, you know, with the Jesuits up in Northern California, Los Gatos, and he belonged to this kind of rarefied order where it was sort of Spartan, and he had to take the vow of silence on the major issues, as it happens. And no, anyway, you remember when they used to kid him, they called him Governor Moonbeam, and they said he was the first American in space? He's trying to solve the reentry problem at this very moment. And then we go on to Senator McCarthy.
Actually, I only ran twice. I walked the other 2 times.
David Duke is the son of George Bush.
We cannot let this country go to the party of the Democrats, go to the party of Jesse Jackson and Ron Brown. We think there'll be opportunity.
Now, David Duke is from my adopted hometown, Metairie, Louisiana. My wife is from there, and my brother-in-law, some of you know, is the sheriff down there. Duke is an interesting case. You know, you probably thought you heard it all. He's a Nazi. He's a bad guy. He had plastic surgery. How many of you heard that he worked for the Agency for International Development and was in Laos teaching grade school people English a few years ago, which is interesting. That's out of Jim Garrison's files at the police department when he was the DA. So he obviously, his attitude toward people of color is new. He used to have a tolerant one before he became a naturalized Republican.
Our Judeo-Christian values are going to be preserved. And our Western heritage is going to be handed down to future generations and not dumped onto some landfill called multiculturalism.
Right after this reference, a committee representing a Jewish people asked for the tradition to be returned to them. And
I'd like to hear someone say something about the economy.
You said if the economy is bad, can I get reelected? And the answer is yes, because I'm a good president.
4 soup can-shaped water towers crown the Campbell's manufacturing plant in Camden.
When the dust cleared and there was the can said, "Save me."
What is it in this can that makes you want to save it?
That symbolizes America up there.
I'm not going to say is it soup yet, but I'm tempted. Okay, let's proceed.
Foreign policy? Wait a minute, I didn't come here to talk about foreign policy. Just a minute. What is it?
Tonight in Red Square, the red flag was lowered from the Kremlin.
So this is the last time I appear before you as president of the USSR.
Well, Chris, that's the big story. And I thought that I don't know about you, I thought the networks underplayed it. You know, they kind of acted like it was Immaculate Conception with Boris Yeltsin. I wondered why the Americans felt so close to him, you know. You recall it was only a couple of days ago that Diane Sawyer was walking around his office telling me he couldn't win. And he stood with impunity on top of tanks. He seemed to be somewhat confident. And now, of course, this guy's gone. I don't know about you. I feel very vacant in the heart about Gorbachev going. I really got to like him. I liked him when he went to Iceland and sat down with Reagan and said, you know, we're going broke. Why don't you stop the madness? You know, the armament race, which didn't appeal to President Reagan, as I recall. And, you know, the armament race has been pretty good. It's been pretty good. Whether you're at a high level and you're making B-1 bombers, or you're an informer for the FBI at a lower level, turning in your mother and father as subversives, nobody ever went broke fighting communism, except perhaps the American people, now that I think about it. So, you know, as I say, I've really felt close to Gorbachev, and he started to look more and more like a guy I could empathize with. And then, of course, I remember he couldn't control his wife, and I felt he was just like one of us. And I got, you know, closer and closer, and I kept thinking to myself, why do I like this guy? And it may be simply that he was the only president I ever had. You know, it's a matter of nostalgia. We'll be right back with you with Senator Eugene McCarthy. know, a lot of the stories I pick up and pass along to you, a lot of knowledgeable nods in the audience. A great many of them I got from the fellow I'm going to introduce you to, because I've known him for many years. And, you know, true to my code, I never backed him, you know, because that would be a conflict of interest. I began to like him afterwards. Now, you know, you may recall, Americans didn't always feel as helpless as they do now. Most of the people I talk to don't want to vote, or if they do, they feel kind of powerless about it, and, you know, all the jokes about voting for the evil of two lessers and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, why vote for them? It only encourages them. So, I met Senator McCarthy a long time before '68, which we're going to cover in a second, briefly. And what appealed to me, of course, was the spin he put on everything. It was the wit. You know, I remember once he had a press conference. He announced after he resigned from the Senate he was going to go back, and a reporter said to him, reporter from NBC said, "Senator McCarthy, can you face the fact that you don't have many followers?" And Senator McCarthy said, "Well, I want to remind you that Jesus only had 12, and one of them turned out to be unreliable." And the reporter, being a good NBC guy with a lot of intellectual curiosity, said, "Which one was that?" You know? And McCarthy said, "He's the one who kissed him on the cheek, and the problem was he turned out to be the treasurer in the campaign." So anyway, you don't have to settle for my version of it. Here's the real thing. Here's Senator Eugene McCarthy. See? Thanks, Jim. Yeah. You're in New Hampshire.
I'm in New Hampshire again.
And there are what, 24 Democrats up there?
Well, I haven't counted them all. The last one I heard was a man named Fisher, who was there in '68. And I debated him before the... in New Hampshire, you could get a liquor license if you could find two people who have one unique characteristic in common.
Oh, yeah?
And I spoke to the Polish Taxpayers Association of Manchester, New Hampshire. And there were three of us there. I spoke. There was a woman there raising money for a monument for Joe McCarthy.
Still.
And a man named Fisher, who invented the ballpoint pen. And I was rather pleased with myself because he attacked me as being communistic and irresponsible. And I said, "Whose pen do you have, Fisher?" He said, "I don't know for sure." I said, "I don't know either." I said, "Nobody knows whose pen he has now." I said, "You've done more to destroy the sense of private property in America than Karl Marx." And I said, "Next it'll be cars. You know, where will it stop?" And at that point, the Polish taxpayers sort of turned off, I think.
The next debate is on PBS, right?
I think so, yeah.
Who's included in the debate among the Democrats?
Well, I don't know. They talk about the six, and they have an empty chair for Cuomo. But they won't let me have it. I keep saying, "Look, I just sit there and listen to you folks. I don't care if you want me to say anything. I can listen." But I'm considered, the New York Times considers me either dangerous or irresponsible or unimportant. They don't carry me in any stories. They just say the six.
Well, you know, I asked Senator McCarthy once which he thought was worse on balance, the New York Times or CBS News, and he pondered for a long time, and he said probably CBS, because when you get to the last page of the Times, they don't say that's the way it is.
They actually say it before you start the Times. They say all the news that's fit to print. And CBS with Walter, it was interesting. I don't like to get off on Walter, but I'm working on a book on the 5 people who, in the name of good works, have done the most harm to America. Not the bad guys, but the good ones.
Yeah, those are the ones you got to watch, isn't it?
Oh, I tell you, man, you never know. And there's some obvious ones like John Foster Dulles and Robert McNamara. And I suspected him when they said he made no small mistakes. We sort of deal with small mistakes in that. But the other 3 are quite serious. One is John Gardner of Common Cause. who actually destroyed politics with the federal election law and Congress with the Reform Act. And he did it all in the name of righteousness. The sort of the theme is what Chesterton said about Puritans. He said they always kill St. George but keep the dragon. And Common Cause is now advocating reform of the reform that they advocated in '76.
Is this by checking off and leaving $2 for...
Well, they were actually the people who said you could not contribute more than $1,000. And I proposed, when we argued this before the Supreme Court, that if John Gardner had been there when Jefferson finished the Declaration, and he said, John, read this. I like that last line. We pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And Gardner would have said, well, it's pretty good, but I want one change. We pledge our lives, our sacred honor, and up to $1,000. It's the new measure of patriotic devotion.
Do you remember '72 when you said you'd be the only candidate that would name your cabinet beforehand?
Yeah, I did.
No surprises?
No, I don't think so.
No, I mean, as opposed to the guys now who keep surprising.
Well, I think they really ought to name 2 or 3 cabinet members, the important ones, so you could make a decision.
Would you care to venture for?
Well, you know, I was going to make you my press secretary. Remember that? And Mort, we were going to get the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal every morning. They'd throw it over the fence. And we'd take it in, and we had a half hour. Mort's the only newspaper reader in America. And we were then going to go out and throw back what we didn't like. You remember?
Yeah, we were going to throw it back. And there was another one. Yeah, Gene told a bunch of the press, and you know, he thinks a lot of the press. He says all they demand in a president is that he be dumber than they are, which is a
hard to
goal.
do. Hard, yeah, it's hard.
You said that when you became...
It's a new factor of dumbness now. I've been watching the Bush people rather closely, and several things. You know, George doesn't like to use the personal pronoun I. Peggy Noonan in her book said that she started to write stuff for George when he was running, and they said, we can't use your material because George doesn't like to say I. She said, in fact, he prefers to have no subject at all. Just a bunch of predicates.
So he wouldn't say, I'm going to war?
No, he said, going to war. And you don't know whether it's a question or not.
I'm going up to inspect the damage in Maine to my home? No?
No, he wouldn't say, I'm going. He'd say, going. And Peggy in her book said they thought maybe when he took the oath of office, he'd say, do solemnly swear. So you don't know whether it's an indicative sentence, an imperative sentence, or a question. And I had developed, your friend Ronald Reagan, who was sort of my friend, that...
I get blamed for everything.
Yeah, well, not that bad, but...
okay.
He, in his world, it was always now. Ronald, as some English historian said of an English politician, was like that. He imagined the past and he remembered the future. That's sort of where he was. It was always now. And he'd say, we're going to recapture our destiny. And you're always on either side of it. It was now. And it worked out pretty well when he went to Iceland because all of a sudden it was now. And Ronald said, well, we might have needed more nuclear weapons then, and we might need more nuclear weapons then, but we don't need them now. And he said, let's just cut back.
That was the way out.
And it turned it around, yeah. Someone said it was the first real example of zero-based thinking.
What, is Cuomo on the level?
I don't really know. I have a thesis that governors probably make the worst president, especially if they've been good governors. I've been feeling better about Cuomo since he's now indicated he's a failure.
Yeah.
If they're good governors, they think they can run the national government. Said, I sent out the National Guard so I can handle the Pentagon. Or I balance the state budget so therefore I can handle the federal budget, and things like that. But if you get a governor who's kind of a failure, why, he comes to the presidency with a sense of modesty.
How about the generals? Ex-generals make presidents?
I eliminated, actually in '87, I eliminated governors, vice presidents, ministers and their sons, generals and admirals, and heads of major corporations, especially of the automobile industry. And we did pretty well. 3 of the categories were eliminated, but people had to make a choice finally between a governor and a vice president, and it was a hard choice.
You know, when you offered me the press secretary's job, there was a proviso. Gene said he was going to call the press in, the first press conference at the White House, and tell them that I was going to be on all 3 networks at 9 o'clock every Saturday night to tell Americans what they had done wrong the previous week for 1 hour. And one of the guys who took it straight says to him, how can you get every network to carry the same program? He said, presidential order.
That's right. You can do it.
Isn't that coercion? And he said, what do you think the FCC is for?
That's right. There's a lot of power down there that's loose that isn't being well used.
Now, what's the next step? New Hampshire?
Well, New Hampshire is the first step. And I told him in New Hampshire that I'm really not as confident as I was in 68, because the New Hampshire election then was on March the 15th, roughly the Ides of March.
Yeah, roughly.
Or the equinox. And I had a speech about, I trusted them because the sap was rising in the maple trees and the equinox was approaching, and this was a time of new life. So under pressure from Iowa to move it back, because Iowa said, we're going to be first, and New Hampshire said, no, we're going to be first. So they moved it back. And actually, New Hampshire, I think, had a law which said we're going to be 2 weeks before anybody else, even if it means doing it in the year before the election.
We got to go, Gene. Thank you. Senator McCarthy, ladies and gentlemen. A few words about Oliver Stone, the director that won't go away. I had to talk about this. You all know that. You know me that well. And I think people would think I'm avoiding it if I didn't talk about it. I thought it had been pretty well talked to death, but it's like everything we consider on this show. We find that they don't touch the bases. They just keep going with the redundancy. So I've gotten several thousand phone calls about this, and everybody's reviewing it as if a movie is the end of the world, although I seem to recall somebody along the way saying real political power comes out of the barrel of a gun. But you saw what happened this month, right? Kevin Costner and Vanity Fair and GQ, which normally, doesn't aspire to this, attacking Oliver Stone, Jack Kennedy, and saying they don't like Garrison either. Jim Garrison, they say, what kind of an investigation could it be if it had a stand-up comedian in it? They don't mean Garrison. And then, of course, you've got Esquire, and you had Time, and you had Newsweek, and it just went on forever. And then, of course, the tabloids got pretty gory. So I know a little bit about this case, and for those of you who are kind of confused about what I would know about it, I was in New Orleans for 5 years with Garrison, and I had a television show on Metro Media, and as it happened, the network sent me down to interview him in 1966, so I got to know him pretty well, and I stuck around. He doesn't bear any resemblance to the fellow in the movie. The guy in the movie, if you saw the movie, and the chances are, according to the box office figures, most of you did, Kevin Costner. Can we see a picture of Garrison and Kevin Costner? Here's Kevin Costner, who's about 5'8". Here's Garrison, who's 6'7". So in the immortal words of my friend Mark Russell, Costner is Garrison after Graham Rudman kicked in. This man corresponded with some regularity with people like Bertrand Russell. He, along with Senator McCarthy, are maybe two intellectuals I've met in American politics, and this guy walks around in the picture like he just fell off a turnip truck. You know, what? We have a child, the miracle of birth. You know, I was practicing birth control. I was looking for the stork, and I had a shotgun on the roof. That's the way he plays it. And Oliver Stone has characterized his wife as June Allison in a 1942 Jimmy Stewart picture. So let me tell you a little bit about the kind of guy Garrison is. When I arrived in New Orleans in 1966, Garrison was the district attorney. Two gay young men had a bookstore in downtown New Orleans for Doubleday. The police arrested them for obscenity because of the books they had in the window. Garrison had to prosecute. Garrison invited both of them to dinner at his house, and when they got out there, he said, "I'm going to show you how to fight the case and beat me in court." And they were astonished, and they said, "Why would the district attorney set up his own defeat in court and everything?" He said, "It's simple. Next time, this crowd will burn your books." That's who he is. You would never know it from this movie. But the movie and Garrison and the reputation and all, before we set the record straight, it all emerged, of course, out of the crime. So, you young men in the booth, can we see the magic bullet? Once more into the breach with this, but not for long. This, of course, is bullet 399, which Arlen Specter, the nemesis of Anita Hill, right? Arlen Specter said, you recall, had hit the president in the back and come out of his chest and paused for a second and a half and saw Governor Connolly and decided to go on, and then went into his leg and came out and went into his wrist and emerged pristine and unscathed. And this was presented. He was a senior lawyer for a thing called the Warren Commission, which was appointed by President Johnson and invented by Justice Abe Fortas. And it consisted of Justice Earl Warren and the 7 members of the commission, none of whom ever met as a body. There were never more than 2 present. And they came up with the Warren Report. Let's go over here. This is the Warren Report. Johnny Carson said to me one night on television, some of you may recall, in the historical annals of NBC, he said to me, "I read the Warren Report and I accept it." I said, "You read it?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "When did you do that?" He said, "I holed up one Saturday afternoon and turned my phones off." See? God bless you, Evelyn Wood, wherever you are. Okay, so this is the Warren Report, and it took them 11 months to write this report. And today you read in these magazines and say, well, the report explains what happened to Kennedy. Why doesn't Oliver Stone just go away? So I'll give you an idea of what the report has. Now, for instance, Jack Ruby, a patriotic nightclub owner. Can we see Jack Ruby, fellas? Here's Jack Ruby, who's decided to spare Mrs. Kennedy another trip to the city of hate, Dallas, as he defined it. And he's killing Oswald as Oswald is being guarded by 123 members of the Dallas police force, or 124 if we want to count Ruby. Okay, all right. So Ruby had a nightclub there called the Carousel Club. This, of course, didn't make it into Oliver Stone's movie because, as he said, he had to dramatize it. So in the club, there was a bartender named Laverne Crayford. Laverne Crayford was apprehended by the FBI. Now, the FBI says in this volume of the Warren Report that Crayford, when the president was killed, he heard on the radio as he was sweeping up the club in the bar, he heard the president has been shot in Dealey Plaza. So he lived in the club. He went back to his living quarters, and he says he packed the bag. Says so in here, there's a seal of the government. It means all of this is, you can believe all of this. So he packed his bag, and he started to leave for the bus station. And when they asked him why, he said, "I didn't want that murder pinned on me," as any normal person would feel. And it says, the FBI gave pursuit in a Mercury Turnpike cruiser and overtook him as he walked to the bus station with his bag. So they grabbed him, they got him there, and they brought him back, and he met with the Warren Commission. Who were the 2 members he met with? He met with Justice Earl Warren, the Chief Justice, and Gerald Ford, who later was to play a big role in American politics and a lot of golf games in Palm Springs. So here is a little of the testimony of Crayford to give you an idea how the government found out who killed the president, right? Warren says, what kind of a club was it? And Crayford says, kind of a rough joint, had strippers and a rough crowd. So he said, they did a lot of dances I'd rather not describe. So Justice Warren says, describe these dances. And Crayford says, hey, this stuff is pretty rough. I'd rather not. And Warren says, I have the presidential power of subpoena from Lyndon Johnson, and I'm commanding you to describe these dances. Because they got to find out who killed the president, you know. So Crayford says, they'd done a dance called the Dirty Dog. And Ford says, describe that dance. And Crayford says, it's sickening, disgusting, and revolting if you do it right. So they got to the bottom of the case in 11 months, and then they present their report to President Johnson. Can we see him, fellas? Okay, here's the members of the Warren Commission. There's President Ford, then Representative Ford. Here's the Chief Justice, and he gives the report to Johnson. And for those of you who have children who are doing a school play this year and are tired of dressing up as pilgrims, this would be a good ceremony for them to reenact. Warren says to him, here, he says. And Johnson took the book and said, it's heavy. That's a direct quote. Okay, so now in the movie, you'll see Oliver Stone has Kevin Costner up on the stairs with the press, and they say, how far are you going to go with this, Mr. Garrison? At the top of the staircase, he says, let justice be done though the heavens fall. Well, let me tell you what really took place there. I was in Garrison's office on a phone extension, and a guy called up and said, I'm from the federal government. Well, we didn't know if he was or not. And Garrison's making smoke signals to me. And the guy said, if you see fit to drop this case, you might have a real future. You might become a federal judge with a lifetime appointment. So Garrison motioned to me as what to say to him. So I said, tell him you'll never compromise. So I wrote him a note, and Garrison read it, and he said, as Virgil said, let justice be done though the heavens fall. And this fellow on the other end of the phone in Washington said, Virgil who? All right? Okay, wait, gets better. Now they go to court. Now they go to court with Shaw, right? And the judge presiding is Judge Haggerty. And Colonel Pierre Fink, the man who did the autopsy, gets up on the stand, and he's very patronizing about New Orleans. He says, I'm not sure your stenographer can spell these words. I'm a forensic pathologist, F-O-R-E-N-S-I-C, P-A-T-H, and so forth. So he's spelling, and this goes on for 8 days. And finally, Alvin Oser, who is the guy who did the forensics in the DA's office, Oser says to him, where are you stationed? He said, Bethesda, Maryland, B-E-T-H-E-S-D-A, and so forth. So at the end of it, of 8 days, Oser said to him, where do you imagine the wounds were? Which, was, of course, was a wisecrack. He said, I don't imagine. I'm a physician. They were in the area of the occipital protuberance. So the girl down there, the stenographer, said, who's by now having a nervous breakdown, she said, can you spell occipital protuberance? So he said, of course I can. I'm a doctor. And he says, O-C-C, and he's kind of got indecision. How many C's, how many P's? And because of the tension, like you're at a Hitchcock movie, you're looking for an emotional release, people in the courtroom began to laugh. And Judge Haggerty bunged on his gavel, and he says, I won't have you laughing at Dr. Fink. He's been spelling for 8 days, and this is the first word he's missed. So what do we have with the movie? Can we see the movie again for a second, fellas? So what do we have with this movie? We have the American press saying, I agree with he's a great filmmaker, but I don't agree with his conclusions. Well, I'm going to go the other way because I'm famous for that, right? Because the fact of the matter is, the press is agreeing with everything he has to say, but disagreeing with his right to say it. I could be very self-serving tonight because of my history and say that I agree with what the movie says and it vindicates and absolves some of us. But the fact of the matter is, he's not a very good filmmaker, and he seems to be remarkably suspicious of the truth about the individuals in this, the people that didn't roll over, who continued to love the president. Those of you who do are the ones who are keeping the case alive, not movie makers. So whatever we did down there, and however it comes out, you deserve the facts, because you the American people. And I'm going to leave you with one last graphic, which was presented to me, ironically, on what would have been Jack Kennedy's 52nd birthday. Take a look at that, and I'll see you in a minute. This part of the show is reserved historically, three shows, for really asking ourselves, what does all this mean? You know, I know it's chock full of information, but what does it all mean? Well, I don't know. I look around me, you know, where I live in Los Angeles, people are walking around, the liberals are tearing their hair out saying, my children are materialistic, they're building wine cellars and they're praying for BMWs and collecting certificates of deposit. What happened to truth and beauty? And then if you by the time you get to answer them, they say, well, yeah, truth and beauty are good, but you are putting something away, aren't you, Mort? This materialism is going to eat us up, and it's not going to deliver us. It's not enough to believe in. It's not even a reason to get up in the morning. Now, you know, when I first worked in this town, I worked with the Dave Brubeck Quartet. And the genius in the band, if I might say, well, they all were, but the literary genius in the band was the saxophonist Paul Desmond. And he was an incurable romantic, although I don't think they've come up with a cure yet. So Desmond was going out with this girl. He was really infatuated, and he was reading T.S. Eliot to her. And he was reading The Wasteland. And he kept quoting this to her. Remember, this is several years ago. It was a big discovery. This is the way the world ends, not with a bang, but with a whimper. So he proposed to the girl eventually, and she said to him, I love you, but you're a musician and you have no future, and I need security. So he showed up a couple of times, and the girl wasn't with him, and he was kind of understated. And finally, I said to him, what happened to the girl? And he said to me, this is the way her world ends, not with a whim, but with a banker. So on that note, I want to show you a little film clip tonight. A movie called The Devil and Daniel Webster, about a farmer who wasn't happy with a wife that loved him, or farmers who were his friends and a modest profit. He wanted their land, and he wanted to have an affair with the housekeeper and have his wife stay where she was. He wanted it all, as they like to say today in those upscale yuppie magazines. So he made a deal with the devil. That seems natural. The devil in the movie is Mr. Scratch, played by Walter Houston. And then, of course, when the devil comes to collect, nobody ever wants to make good. And he says, I can't make good. So the devil puts him on trial. And the fellow goes to his neighbor, Daniel Webster, up there in New Hampshire, of all places, appropriately enough tonight. And he says, I got to go on trial. There's one catch. The devil appointed all the guys on the jury, and they're all people that sold their souls to him. And this is a hunk of the trial I want to share with you.
My worthy opponent, Mr. Scratch, called you Americans all. Mr. Scratch is right. You were Americans all. Oh, what a heritage you were born to share. Gentlemen of the jury, I envy you. For you were present at the birth of a mighty union. It was given to you to hear those first cries of pain and behold a shining babe born of blood and tears. You, Benedict Arnold, I speak to you first because you are better known than the rest of your colleagues here. what a different song yours could have been. A friend of Washington and Lafayette, a soldier. Mr. Scratch once told you that your soul meant nothing, and you believed him, and you lost your freedom. Freedom isn't just a big word. It is the morning and the bread and the risen sun. It was for freedom we came to these shores in boats and ships. It was a long journey, a hard one and a bitter one. Yes, we have planted freedom in this earth like wheat. And we have said to the skies above us, a man shall own his own soul. Now here is this man. He is your brother. You are Americans all. You can't be on his side, the side of the oppressor. Let Jeeber Stone keep his soul, a soul which doesn't belong to him alone, but to his family, his son, and his country. Gentlemen of the jury, don't let this country go to the devil. Free Jeeber Stone. God bless the United States and the men who made her free.
There's not much you can say to that. That's Stephen Vincent Benet. So I chose a quote for you. And if you like it, I'll tell you who said it at the end. This writer points out that the history of man seems to be a history of man killing his fellow man. From the thumbscrew to the development of the gallows, better and more efficient ways to dispatch his fellow man. Until now, they all want to come into the hydrogen club. Now, should our worlds, whatever they are, disparate worlds of East and West, or haves and have-nots, collide, and afterward, amid the ruins, a rat comes along to take his turn at evolution. Maybe he's crawling through the eye socket into the skull, and the cavity where once resided the reasoning power to travel from the Earth to the moon and back. Dachau, Nagasaki, Dallas, New Orleans, Louisville, Boston. Where's your hometown? And by that time, what will they say of man? Where are his treasured hatreds? Where is this creature of infinite jest? What happened to him? And mostly, where is his splendid indifference now? Jim Garrison, 1959.